wisdom. Talking specifically in the scriptures about the wisdom of King Solomon. Whenever wisdom is talked about in Bible studies, there will always be some kind of footnote to Solomon, the greatest king in terms of wisdom. So it got me thinking about wisdom, and I think it's something in the season, but I just got back from a camping trip pulling a trailer. I understand you heard a little bit about that from our guest preacher last week too. I too had some heaven and hell moments that were interesting. My Xterra, my Nissan, it will pull 5,500 pounds, which is well over what my camper weighs in at before you put the camping gear in it. Apparently, all of the camping gear that my family owns is really heavy. So when we finally, first off, we missed our turn off to 465 and just went on up 65 to 70 and got on 70, and I don't really notice how bumpy that road is on a normal commute to a hospital or a prayer before someone has surgery on the north side, but oh my. When you're pulling a trailer, every little imperfection of the road begins to be magnified. Every time a semi-truck would go by me, I would swerve nearly out of my entire lane because that trailer, although not very big, acted like a very big sail. So as that wind came by, I just kind of scooted over, and Heather, with white knuckles on the dashboard, said, "You know we can turn around and go home, right?" But no, I thought wisdom would be a much better choice. I said, "No, dear, I can just slow down." So our 4.5-hour trip took us 5.5 hours to get down to southern Illinois, where we did have a wonderful, wonderful time. Now, sometimes when we talk about wisdom, we talk about and we think about just not making dumb choices, right? What's wisdom? Just don't be a moron about it. Be smart. No. There's a difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is knowing that tomatoes are a fruit. Wisdom is not putting them in a fruit salad. There is a difference. There is a difference. And as we look to the scriptures today for what Solomon's life story has to teach us, we come into this notion that as he is at this high place, that's not a place that is designated directly for the God that we've been hearing so much about. You know, the God that led Moses and the children of Israel out of Egypt. That's not a high place for him. Solomon, as I accidentally read at the very beginning of chapter 3, marries a whole bunch of different women from all over the region. And he's a good husband, so he just kind of practices their religion too. So as he's there at a festival for one of the other gods, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob comes to him and says, "Hey, you know, you're the king of Israel, right? You are aware who you are, right? What do you want?" And Solomon says, "You know, honestly, God, I just want wisdom." You know, maybe Solomon knew some of the things that he was doing weren't quite right. Maybe he understood that what was going on in his life were some choices that he was making that weren't quite right, and he needed that gift to discern those choices before he made them. And so he asked for wisdom. When our wills and our wants and our choices line up with what God holds as best choices for us, it is easier for God to bless us. God says to Solomon, "Wow, you didn't ask for riches or any of this other stuff." And in verse 10, which we'll see in a minute, he goes on to say that he's just going to give it to him anyway. I don't know if you heard or not, but there was like this big lottery thing in the last week. Did you hear about that? Yeah, this thing where it's easier to run outside and get struck by lightning 260 times than it is to win. And yet people were going, you know, if I win that, I'm going to. Sometimes it's a good distraction. Sometimes it's a fun thing to do. But yet, when Solomon asked, he didn't ask for, hey, God, I want to win the lottery. I want you just to give me some money. No, he didn't. He said, God, I want you to help me make good choices that line up with you. And how interesting that he quotes his own dad, King David. Remember we heard about him a few weeks ago? Saw a beautiful woman sunbathing and basically stole her. I mean, he repented and went through that whole process, but we're talking about some broken people here in these scriptures. So Solomon's there, he's on the high place, he's talking to God, he's asking for wisdom, and God says, yes, I'll give that to you. So Solomon wanted to be wise above all else, and when he was fully focused on that and fully focused on God, he was a tremendous instrument on God's behalf. Now we skip down to this other story that just kind of slides in there about these two prostitutes who live in the same house, apparently. And a baby dies while sleeping in the bed with its mother. She's distraught and takes the dead baby and exchanges it for a live one with the other woman that's in the house and tries to pass it off as her own. But the mother, knowing her own child, knows that some trickery is afoot and calls it out, and they're obviously have a fight. So the authorities are called and they go before the king to sort it out, because the king is kind of like the president, the representatives of the House and Senate, and the Supreme Court all rolled into one. So he is there on the throne, the judgment seat, to render his opinion that then becomes law. And he says, just cut it in half. And then the real mother going, is acknowledged, and it ends happily after. Now, as an aside, I can never get through this story without thinking of the time as a police chaplain in the city of Fort Wayne that I was dispatched out to an infant death, where an exhausted mother who just wanted to catch a couple of moments of sleep snuggled into her bed and had her baby at her side so she'd hear if he cried. And as she slept for the first time in days, the child was accidentally smothered. And I sat there on the curbside of the street with this woman who was in so deep a shock that she could not even cry. And I think about this woman in the scriptures, because she's so easily vilified. That liar, that cheat, we dehumanize her so that we can see how smart and wise Solomon is. But do we ever think about the woman whose child died? Do we ever think about how she was feeling? Do we ever think about that she was at such the end of her rope that she would dare to try and steal another child just to try and fill the void from her grief? No, we don't think about that. That's too complicated. We don't have time for that. I don't know why I just went into a southern accent, but we don't have time for that. These Bible stories are not as simple as they seem. Solomon himself becomes a symbol of that. But within the scope of this two sides, and this one that says the greater good is that it lives, the greater good is that this child is still okay. That's what matters. And the other one says, I don't care. I want to win, and since I don't know that I'm going to, just cut it in half. That way at least I know she doesn't. And then that shifts immediately from a moral tale within the Hebrew ancient scriptures to what seems like the world we're living in our country. We've got people from both sides of the traditions of our great two-party system that have decided that, you know what, I'm not sure if I'm going to win, so let's just burn it down. I just really don't care. Well, now there's the caring, the way it kind of looks, but there's so much negativity. I mean, I remember back in a day when the mud wasn't really slung quite as thick as it seems to be now. And for whatever reason, these insanely broken people commit these acts of heinous violence in our country. The energy that I think prods them on isn't one side or the other. I firmly believe it's the tension between the two, because no one is standing in the middle ground to say, no, you can't go into a synagogue and murder people. There's no one standing in the firm ground that says, no, you can't do this to people because their skin color is darker than yours. You can't do that. There's no one that's really clearly standing together, holding both sides and saying, no, 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 no. This is not acceptable. Now, we had people issue statements and thoughts and prayers and thoughts and prayers. If I was a Jewish person in Pittsburgh, I don't know that I'd be all that comforted by thoughts and prayers. We need people to hold hands. We need people to bond together and see that the quality of life from birth to death is sacred. There are folks that are so focused on winning. Yeah, cut it in half. Divide it. Divide it up. See what happens after that. But what was interesting about Solomon is that God said, well, Solomon, you didn't ask for riches, you didn't ask for a long life, and you didn't ask for the defeat of your enemies. Verse 10, the Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this, so God said to him, since you have asked for this, and not for a long life or wealth for yourself, or have not asked for the death of your enemies, you have not asked to what? Cut things in half, mow them down. Now, I'm not saying that Solomon never had people who opposed him murdered. I'm not saying that Solomon was perfect. I'm not saying Solomon as a king didn't send his troops into battle. But what I'm saying is that he did not ask of God to mow down his opponents. Even more interesting, when God says, you know what? Even though you didn't ask for these things, I'm going to give them to you anyway. The one thing God does not give him is what? The lives of his enemies. Why? Because God is not in the business of just mowing people down because we ask for it. Because God stands in the middle and holds everyone together and says, you guys got some crazy ideas, but you need to kind of come together and see what's important in life. Mediate, compromise, cherish, love, and you'll see how it all works. And it's easy. It is so easy to begin to dehumanize, to vilify. I mean, when you hear someone shouting things you just in your heart do not believe are true or right or anything in this political season, and you get so angry, it's not their point of view you begin to hate, it's them. And it is so human. Pastor Mac talked so wonderfully last week about which kind of world are you living in? And this is where we get pulled into both sides of heaven and hell. Trying to be protectors of the truth, and then the moment we vilify our enemy, we just stand right with them. We voluntarily step into that pit. Here's what our heritage says about this time of election. John Wesley said in 1774, 2 years before the Declaration of Independence was signed, he says, I met those of our society who had votes in the ensuing election, and I advised them, one, to vote without fee or reward for the person they judged most worthy, because you could be bribed. He goes, nope, Methodists don't take bribes. You vote for whoever you deem worthy. Second, to speak no evil of the person they voted against. Oh my gosh, how would America be different if we didn't speak evil of the person that we voted against, whether they win or lose? Just let it go. What would that look like? And three, to take care of their spirits were not sharpened against those that voted on the other side. But we're speaking evil, and our spirits are sharpened. Because we're flawed and we are not perfect, and it's just so stinking easy. I mean, do you know how much harder it is to fight that impulse? You know how much harder it is to try and live a life of righteousness in this climate that we're all living in? It's hard. It's hard to love people who just seem so icky. A good church word, icky. I dare you to get into a political debate this week and go, you know what, I'm just not liking you very much right now. You're very icky. You're very icky, but I love you, so let's just stop. Yeah, right? That'd diffuse a lot of problems, wouldn't it? I'm going to see Facebook blowing up, icky, icky, hashtag icky, hashtag icky. But here's the reason why. Yeah, you might be like, Pastor, that's great. John Wesley, the founder of our tribe, our faith, in the United Methodist Church, the Methodist Episcopal Church, and before that, the Anglican Church. Yes, that's our people. But that's a different kind of time. That's a different kind of election. I don't really think that his words hold true to me. Okay, I respect that opinion if that's yours. So let's go to a higher power. That's what Jesus say. Let's see what Jesus says. Love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, and pray for those who mistreat you. We had it easier with John Wesley. Jesus gets involved in the inner workings of our human hearts because of his deep desire to save our human souls. And all of a sudden, even the writing on the wall seems to just seem impossible. Really, Lord? I mean, it's like being the rich guy that goes to Jesus and says, hey, what do I have to do to follow you? And Jesus says, sell all you got. He's like, what? You heard me. Sell all you got. Give it to the poor. Then you can be my disciple. Jesus finds that one thing that we have held above God, that one thing that we hold as true, that we will always go to on our darkest moment and in a moment of happiness, the one thing that we think is the most important thing in life, if it is not God, that's the thing. Jesus says, give it up. Self-righteousness. Give it up. The need to accumulate things and stuff and to say, well, I'm not a good person if I don't have this much money in my bank account. Give it up. Well, what about when people are mean? Love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, and pray for those who mistreat you. That's not very easy. If it was easy, the word discipleship wouldn't have the root discipline, now would it? That just seems kind of hopeless. It was so much easier for Solomon. I mean, Solomon's like, he's up worshiping another god, and God kind of comes up to him like a genie in a lamp and says, can I give you a wish? Man, that'd be a lot easier than what Jesus has got going on for us. Can we push the pause button and just go back to the Old Testament? God, here I am on this hilltop having nothing to do with you. You want to offer me something? Love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, and pray for those who mistreat you. And see, we see Solomon and we see his power to be able to do good on God's behalf. And wouldn't it be nice to push that pause button and leave Solomon just right there in that perfect moment where he is this king of wisdom? He is so well revered. But we can't. Because to leave Solomon here and not tell the rest of his story robs us of the truth of what the Scripture is trying to teach us. And that is, it is one thing for God to bless you and give you a gift. It is one thing for God to speak to you and to be on the same page as God. It is another thing entirely to live daily that way. A lot of traditions like to talk about, when were you saved? Are you saved? Are you saved? Years ago, I was working at a church camp, and a young girl was just so excited about being there at camp, and she's a little camper, and I was, when you work at church camp, you do everything. You work on the line, you weed eat, you mow, you put chemicals in the pool, you serve the food, you do all kinds of stuff. And there was a different, denominational tradition, but, there's some great Christian folks, and I was there, and it was commitment night, and I was helping put snacks out for afterwards, and she says, are you saved? And I said, yeah, I'm saved. Want a cookie? And she goes, no. Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? When the devil calls, will you? I'm like, what happened to you? And she pushed and she got nasty. And in a moment of sinful pride, I slipped and I said, sweetie, I'm Methodist. I'm not saved until I'm dead. What? I said, yeah, Wesley's tier of grace works. No, I didn't go into that. But I was in this moment. I said, salvation is a moment, and it's wonderful. And yes, I've had that moment, and I asked Jesus into my heart, but I'm not done yet. I've got to get up each day like I'm kneeling at the altar for the first time and say, Lord, I give my heart to you. Lord Jesus, thank you for saving me from my sin. Now walk with me this day and make sure I don't mess it up too badly. It is a daily thing. It's part of our Methodist tribe in that thing. And I do regret saying those words to her in that way, and we did talk about it later, and we were able to kind of patch things up. But I just felt attacked and cornered, and I just flippantly said that. But there is some truth to that in the way that we understand human salvation through Jesus Christ, that it is a choice, it is a one-time aha moment, but it is a choice you must make daily. Choose daily who will you follow. Who's it going to be? You see, Solomon would become obsessed with all these foreign women, not just because of their beauty, although that was part of it, but because of the dowries and the money and the power that would lend to Israel, and also the military connections and alliances that marrying into those families would provide for Israel and its security. But he didn't do that with God's permission. God very clearly said, don't be marrying outside of our tradition, because the temptation with these other religions will be too great. But Solomon did it anyway. In fact, because of the things that he would do and the decisions he would start to make, he was actually pushing harder and kind of twisting things down for his people to the point where they were becoming oppressed. And shortly after his death, the kingdom of Israel split into Israel and Judah. The nation of God was cut in half. The wisest king to ever live was basically responsible for cutting an entire nation in two. Over ideologies, over things that just couldn't be reconciled, and so they split. There was no one there in the middle that was wise to hold everybody together. The one person who had the wisdom directly from God was not capable of setting other things aside and holding things together. Solomon continued to go to high places that had nothing to do with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. His decisions brought money and power, but lust, greed, and preoccupation with the world, those things aren't just limited to kings, are they? We're all tempted by those things. Anything that tempts us from keeping God as the most important thing in our life can lead to our destruction too, can cut us in half, can cut our families in half, can divide our communities. Trusting the impossible odds of a lottery instead of the promised care of God, looking to someone other than our spouse and violating the vows that we have taken, looking first to our political culture to establish our sense of right and wrong, those things will lead to our destruction. If Solomon with the gift of wisdom can mess things up so badly, what hope do we have? What hope can we possibly have if the one who was filled to the brim with wisdom like no other king or human being before or since, Scripture says, oh my gosh, what is our hope? What hope can we possibly have? And the answer is none. We can absolutely have no help in ourselves whatsoever. No hope. But that, friends, is why we need Jesus. Because if it's up to us, we'll do the same things Solomon did. We do the same things that Solomon did. But Christ is there moment by moment, day by day, week by week, lifetime by lifetime to hold our hand and teach us how to walk in community and to hold things together. To take greater goods and to lift them up. And to find humane and smart and wise ways to deal with conflicts that we seem to have trouble resolving. Holding together. If we cling to anything else, if we prize anything else, if we value anything else, other than Jesus, well, I think we all know how that story ends. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit.